Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Week 7 Highlight Haven NFL Recap Show. I'm your host, Matthew Heiserman, and today we are joined by Josh Wolver of Josh's Sports Report to break down each and every game that took place during Week 7 of the NFL season. Josh, it's great to have you on.
Yeah, thanks for inviting me on the show, Matthew. Excited to talk some football with you today.
Yeah, absolutely. Looking forward to it. And, just like our tailgate show, we will be accepting callers throughout the stream. So feel free to call in using the link in the chat. With that being said, we have a lot of great games to break down. So let's jump right into it. Of course, there was that Saints Broncos Thursday night matchup, but we are going to skip over that one. And, I'm thinking that in the future, we'll probably recap that Thursday night matchup during the tailgate show on Sunday, just because it's
hmm
pretty far apart from the Monday games. But we'll start yesterday in London. 9:30 game, Patriots versus Jaguars. The Jaguars ended up winning that one 32-16. Of course, that was the Jaguars' second game in London. They lost the first one pretty badly against the Chicago Bears. What were your main takeaways following that game?
Yeah, well, you're coming in against the Patriots team that's pretty unexperienced with a rookie head coach. Jaguars had a few explosive plays. Matthew, you saw that 97-yard return to the house on that kick that was sparked to the offense. But Trevor Lawrence, a little shy of 200 yards, almost 100 of those went to Brian Thomas Jr. So when you think in the offseason about how much this Jaguars team paid Trevor Lawrence, and you're sitting here at 2-5 with a coach that's very much on the hot seat, probably you know the biggest coach, the coach in the NFL right now, closest to being fired. And you sit here and say this is a must win against a terrible Patriots team. They end up getting the job done, 32-16, high scoring game.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, despite the loss, Drake May did look very promising. Of course, he had a good start last week against the Texans. They lost that one as well. But in this game, 26 for 37, 276 passing yards, and two touchdowns. Overall, a really good game for May. And then we saw Tank Bigsby really step up without Travis Etienne. Of course, Etienne was injured that game. Bigsby got a lot of workload, 26 carries, 118 rushing yards, and two rushing touchdowns. Overall, Jacksonville still not looking great. 2-5 on the year, I believe,
Yep.
but they did have a good game there. Now, moving over to the next game, and the game that my audience on YouTube voted as the game of the week, Lions versus Vikings in Minnesota. Of course, the Vikings were 5-0 heading into this matchup, and the Lions ended up taking them down 31-29 on a game-winning field goal by Lions kicker Jake Bates. What did you see in this game?
Yeah, well, very much so the game of the week. Great vote there by your viewers. You're talking about a Vikings team coming in as 5 and one of two undefeated teams alongside the Kansas City Chiefs and the Detroit Lions, just looking just as good coming into this game at 4-1. And really, what the big thing was for the Lions was the rushing game. They had David Montgomery go down early, though he did return. That was a big blow, and that put a huge workload on Jahmyr Gibbs. Ended up with 116 yards to pair along with two touchdowns. Jared Goff also had a really good game, just shy of 300 yards at 280. That pairs with two touchdowns. Vikings played well, just not well enough.
Yeah, absolutely. And a very productive game for both offenses. You see Jahmyr Gibbs, 15 carries, 116 rushing yards, and two touchdowns, along with four receptions for 44 receiving yards. Amon-Ra St. Brown got eight receptions, just over 100 yards, and a touchdown. Aaron Jones, 14 carries, 93 yards, and a touchdown. And then, of course, Justin Jefferson, seven receptions, 81 yards, and a touchdown. Now, what this game showed me especially is that I knew that the Lions were always contenders, and I had them winning this game. But I was still unsure about the Vikings heading into this matchup. They show before this game they had proven that they were a good team, but I still had my doubts. This game really did show me that they can compete at a good level. We see how good the Lions are. They held their own, and Now the Lions are leading the NFC, but the Vikings not too far behind. Definitely could they should make the playoffs. Definitely could make a little push in the playoffs. But moving over to the next game, Titans versus Bills, a blowout here. Bills ended up winning this one 34-10. Curtis Samuel did exit the game with a shoulder injury, was ruled out. And of course, Will Levis was not able to start for the Titans in this one. He was injured. Mason Rudolph started for Tennessee. He went 25 for 40, 215 passing yards, one touchdown, one interception. Not a great game. What did you see in this one?
Yeah, well, Matthew, you talk about a blowout score at the end, 34-10. You're absolutely right. But what some people aren't going to notice when they look at this final score is that the Titans were actually beating the Bills at halftime, which was a big shock, right? You're talking about a Tennessee team that's no good. They've been bad at quarterback all season, and they just get a lot worse. Will Levis downgraded to out before this game, and you mentioned it, Mason Rudolph starting. And this is going to be his first game for the Tennessee Titans. I mean, it's not terrible. It completed 25 of 40, 215 yards. Bills just really got started slow. James Cook, not much of a factor, 12 carries for only 32 yards. That's less than 3 yards a carry. But then the Bills wide receivers stepped it up when they needed to. You have Keon Coleman. This is a ridiculous stat line. 4 receptions, 125 yards. You have Amari Cooper, the newest addition, for receptions for 66 yards. He also hauled in a touchdown, though that was on a play, Matthew, if you remember watching that, where it really didn't look like he knew where he was going, but all ended well when he found himself in the end zone. But when you think about the way that Tennessee started off, this game started really strong. Buffalo is going to end up scoring 27 unanswered after half, and that's what led them to the win.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, I do also want to add Damar Hamlin got his second interception of the season in this
Mhm.
game. So you love to see that. And then Coleman became the first Buffalo Bills wide receiver this season to get 100 yards receiving, as you mentioned, 125 yards, 4 receptions. Overall, I figured that the Bills were going to have a pretty easy win here. The
Right.
spread was Bills' favorite by 9. They ended up easily passing that. Going on to the next game now, we have the Dolphins versus the Colts. Similar to the Titans, another quarterback that could not start, obviously, Tua Tagovailoa has been out for a few weeks. Tyler Huntley was starting for the Dolphins. However, Huntley did exit the game with a right shoulder injury, and Tim Boyle took over at quarterback. Wasn't quite enough for the Dolphins. They lost 10-16 against the Colts. What were your main takeaways from this one?
Man, Matt, this game was ugly. I mean, talk about a 16-10 final. Tyler Huntley, even before he got injured, only completed 7 passes for 87 yards. This is a Dolphins team that is so stacked. You're looking at Achane, you're looking at Mostert, and then on the receiving end, you have Waddle, you have Tyreek Hill. OBJ just got back. Here's what happened. Miami did not use their weapons. When you have a backup quarterback in, the biggest thing that's going to help them is using your playmakers and letting them make plays. Let me read you off a couple of stats, Matt. Odell Beckham Jr., no receptions. It makes sense. It's his first game. Tyreek Hill, 1 reception from 8 yards. That doesn't make sense. Jalen Waddle, 1 reception for 11 yards. That doesn't make sense. They really backed the running game, which makes sense with a backup quarterback. But I got to feel for these Dolphins fans. If you're talking about a healthy Tua Tagovailoa in right now, I'm looking at them as a 5-1 team. This is a pretty unacceptable loss. The Colts with Anthony Richardson, this is a game that they should have blown out. Richardson didn't really look great. 129 yards through the air. He did also run for 56. But the biggest thing for the Dolphins is going to be when Tua gets back, how is that going to affect the playmakers? How is he going to be able to get the ball into the hands of the guys who make the big plays?
Yeah, absolutely. Now, I mean, the simple thing here, and we talked about this during the tailgate show, but I think it was pretty obvious that Joe Flacco should have been starting for the Colts this game just based off how he's been playing so far
Agreed.
this season. But my big takeaway is just the Dolphins can't do anything without Tua. It's
Yep.
simple. You mentioned they can't go to their playmakers. I have a few stats here. Jonnu Smith did have a good game, 7 receptions, 96 yards, and a touchdown. But this season, without Tua, Tyreek has averaged 35 receiving yards per game, and the Dolphins have averaged just 10 points per game with Tua. Hasn't been very much better for Jalen Waddle, also, as you mentioned. But overall, this offense, until they get Tua back, will not be competing for anything. It's that simple. Um, mhm.
Yeah, well, what I wanted to add to that is this shows you, I think, at least from my perspective, that Tua Tagovailoa is a good quarterback. Before this, you didn't really see, you had the turnover issues with Tua. But the difference between when he's in the lineup and when he's out of the lineup, this is a team that scored 70 points last year, right? In one game, the difference between him being in there and him being out of there is huge. These past few games, when you have Tyler Huntley and in this game Tim Boyle under center for Miami, has just shown me how much Tua Tagovailoa can do, and I believe that I was now underestimating him by a long shot before he was injured. This game showed me a lot about not what Tua can do because he wasn't on the field, but the difference he makes.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's all about comparisons, when he was on the field, oh, this is an he gets a lot of receiving yards or he gets a lot of passing yards, but that's probably just because of his weapons. He's very interception prone. Now we're just seeing how much of an impact he really makes. But moving over to the next game, the Seahawks versus the Falcons in Atlanta, a game that I don't think anyone could have predicted. This crazy of an outcome. Seahawks 34, Falcons 14, a dominating win. DK Metcalf exited the game with a knee injury, but the Seahawks are optimistic that it's nothing too serious. Before he exited the game, 4 receptions, 99 yards, and a touchdown. Overall, just a beatdown for the Seahawks. Of course, Atlanta was on a pretty hot streak before this happened. Did you expect this outcome?
No, I didn't. I thought Atlanta would play a lot better. I did not see Seattle getting 34 points against the Atlanta defense. Uh, between the Falcons and the Seahawks combined, I think they both have really good running games. Atlanta able to use that a little more. Bijan over 100 yards with 103 and a rushing touchdown. Kenneth Walker limited to only 69 yards and a touchdown. But you mentioned it, uh, the biggest point of the game for Seattle is going to be that defense. They had 2 interceptions, but also the passing game with Geno Smith, 207 yards, 2 touchdowns, one of those to Metcalf, and one of those to Kenneth Walker out of the backfield in the receiving game. Jackson Smith and Jigba, not much of a contributor, though he did have a big pass downfield. But I thought that this year Seattle would be incorporating JSN a lot more, but not in this game, only 3 receptions for 9 yards.
Yeah, and I mean, Kirk Cousins this year has just been on and off. Of course, I think going into this year, people were considering him one of the more reliable quarterbacks in the NFL, of course, playing with Justin Jefferson in Minnesota. However, he had that 4 touchdown game against, I believe it was the Buccaneers. And then this game, he goes out and he really struggles. 2 interceptions, also lost a fumble that was returned for a touchdown. Michael Penix actually made his NFL debut. Frankly, it was just one completion for 14 yards.
Mm.
But the fact that Penix actually had to come into this game, I don't think the Falcons were really expecting that, of course, heading into this one. But overall, are the Seahawks contenders? Because they started 3-0 against some fraudulent teams. And then they began to lose. They became 3-3 after 3 straight losses, and then they have this win. Are they contenders in your eyes?
I think they can be. I don't think they are right now. That Metcalf injury depends how long he's out for. Could be a setback, but I think that this Seattle team, Geno Smith is not getting any younger. He's on the aging side. This Seattle team, the key for them this year is going to be the running game with Kenneth Walker and Zach Charbonnet, and that's a good 1-2 combo. I think the passing game has the ability. Can the running game become an elite level? Is what my question is for this team.
Yeah, and of course, we saw that game-winning field goal in the Lions-Vikings game. Another game-winning field goal that we had in another game was the Texans versus Packers. Packers ended up winning 24-22. Of course, this game was in Green Bay. Brandon McManus with the game winning field goal, just signed by just signed by the Packers. Of course, he was involved in some, off the field stuff over the offseason, but then got signed. Wasn't really expecting any team to sign him, so kind of a surprise there, but ended up making a big impact in this one. What were your thoughts on this one? This game?
Yeah, 100% clutch kick from McManus, signed off the streets, but boy, did he did his job. Someone who did not do their job is CJ Stroud. 86 passing yards. When I read that, I didn't think it was right. I mean, that does not make sense. CJ Stroud is widely considered a top 10 quarterback in this league, but 86 passing yards is not going to cut it. Joe Mixon did partially make up for that in the ground game, 115 yards, pairs with 2 touchdowns. Jordan Love turnovers were a bit of a problem through 2 interceptions. That certainly helped the Texans' cause, but then also threw 3 touchdowns and 220 yards. Josh Jacobs, a big rusher there, almost 80 yards. Romeo Dobbs, another big game for him, also almost 100 yards. Packers barely win it. I knew this was going to be a good game going into it. Packers are now improved to 5-2. Texans dropped to 5-2 after being 5-1. Boy, these are going to be 2 great teams going forward.
Yeah, now, I mean, with Jordan Love, of course, he got injured week 1 in Brazil against the Eagles. Since he's come back, he's played 4 games, and I mean, his stats have been very interesting. He's gotten a lot of passing yards. He's gotten 13 passing touchdowns, I believe, in 4 games, but he also has 7 interceptions. So he has been turning the ball over quite a lot. But, definitely high expectations for both these teams going forward, as you said. Now, a team maybe not as high of expectations, the Cleveland Browns against the Cincinnati Bengals. Bengals won this one 21-14. Now, the headline of this game, obviously, is the Deshaun Watson injury. He went down with an Achilles injury, during the game,
Yep.
and it was a non-contact play, which, just makes it worse. What does this mean for the Browns?
Yeah, well, this is really unfortunate. You mentioned a non-contact is 100% terrible on his end. And it seems like this injury bug is kind of getting passed throughout the league a little bit. But Watson really was not playing well in front of this game. You had Dorian Thompson-Robinson, and then at a point, Jameis Winston, even the third stringer, getting some reps in there for the Browns. I don't think this changes things instrumentally for Cleveland. This is a 1-6 football team. I don't think that their starting quarterback going down, is going to be a big blow and, the season's over because this Browns team really isn't good. You add the addition of Nick Chubb, really wasn't great. He went for 2 yards a carry, 22 yards on 11 attempts. David Njoku actually played pretty well for them, did get a touchdown. It's very unfortunate that Deshaun Watson went down, but do I see it as something where the Browns are, in big trouble? No, I don't. I don't think that this Deshaun Watson injury means much for them, but I do think it's going to, be the last chance for Dorian Thompson Robinson. This is a guy that's gotten multiple chances as a backup, and if he can't start, if he gets the starting role in Cleveland and doesn't play well in these next few weeks, you can expect him to be off the roster pretty soon.
Yeah, now it is important to know that he actually suffered I believe, finger injury. And they might have gone to Jameis Winston if he didn't suffer that injury, but I do think that did play a part in it. Overall, Cincinnati played all right. Charlie Jones, of course, set the tone with the kick return touchdown on the first play. T. Higgins and Jamar Chase combined for 9 receptions, 137 yards, and 2 touchdowns. Now, something that I don't think people are talking about is the fact that Deshaun Watson was 15 for 17 before getting injured. That's just above an 88 completion percentage, and a decent sample size as well, which is obviously very impressive. It's hard to know what Browns fans think right now. I don't know if they are happy that he's not starting for them anymore, but either way, really terrible injury, and you hate to see anyone get hurt. Now, moving over to the Eagles versus Giants game in New York, Saquon Barkley revenge game. And it's safe to say that he had an amazing game. Eagles ended up winning this one 28-3. Jalen Hyatt exited the game, cracked his ribs. But what did you notice from this game?
Yeah, this game was filled with sacks. I feel like every time I was on Red Zone, every single time that they were flipping between the games, it was always a sack for one of these two teams. Eagles defense was going at it, and this Giants offensive line, minus Andrew Thomas, is going to mightily struggle, especially against a good front like the Eagles. They added Bryce Huff in the offseason. Now, this is a team, the Eagles, that has underperformed so far. Nick Sirianni very much on the hot seat. You saw him last week in a bit of controversy there, a bad interaction with a fan after the game. But boy, you said Saquon Barkley revenge game, and you were right. 17 carries for 176 yards. I think that's like 20 or 30 yards shy of his career high, and a touchdown against his former team. That's big. A.J. Brown, he was injured for a couple of weeks, 89 yards and a touchdown as well. But Devontae Smith really wasn't involved. He got one reception. And he actually lost yardage on that play. He got dropped for a loss of 2 on the play. So A.J. Brown was really the only receiver that got a big play. And the Eagles only completed 10 offensive passes. That says a lot about what this offense is. This is turning into a running offense with the addition of Saquon Barkley. This is becoming less of a Jalen Hurts deep passing offense. And Daniel Jones really still needs to figure some stuff out. His team scored 3 points in a full quarter game, less than 100 yards passing. Giants continue to rely on the run, but with a worse offensive line after the loss of Andrew Thomas, it's going to be tough to consistently get the ground game going. Devin Singletary only 18 yards on the game. Malik Neighbors is looking good, though. That's what I picked up from this game.
Yeah, now Saquon, obviously you mentioned how good he played. Eagles offensive lineman Jordan Mailata was also out with an injury this game, so really impressive. And I think we knew that the Eagles were always a running team, and not to discredit DeAndre Swift in any way, but Saquon is just a lot better, and he really is able to, just bring that out of this team, show how good they really can be, not necessarily rely on the tush push. However, we saw Hurts actually did get 2 touchdowns that way, but
Yeah.
still, they've been a lot more productive running the ball this year. As you said, less reliant on the passing game. Now, moving on to the next game, and one that was probably considered to be one of the more boring games entering this week, Raiders versus Rams. Rams ended up winning this one 20-15. Very close ending, came down to the wire. Aiden O'Connell exited this game with a thumb injury. It's kind of been back and forth between him and Gardner Minshew this year. O'Connell got the starting job, and he did go down with a thumb injury, exited the game. Gardner Minshew took over as the Raiders QB and definitely struggled. 15 for 34, 154 passing yards, and 3 interceptions. Just really bad game for him. What did you take away?
Yeah, completely agree with you, Matthew. You're never going to win a football game when you throw 3 interceptions, or when you are, it's going to be really hard to. This Raiders offense scored 15 points on 5 field goals. Now, what I want to get into is this coaching decision by Antonio Pierce. You are down 2 minutes 46 seconds to play in the fourth quarter. This is a 12-20 ball game, so it's 8 points if you can get the touchdown and then the 2-point conversion. The Raiders went ahead and decided to kick a chip shot 27-yard field goal that Daniel Carlson ended up making. But I think the Raiders should have definitely went for this. They ended up not scoring again, and that's why they lost. But the big thing is here, you can't blame it all on the coaching decisions. When your offense doesn't find the end zone, it's going to be very difficult to win football games. The Rams, mediocre day for Matthew Stafford, 154 yards. He did throw an interception. But what the big thing here was, they got stops in the red zone, forced multiple Raiders field goals after deep drives. So the Rams defense did a nice job, and then a questionable coaching decision by the Raiders. You mentioned Minshew's bad play. That's why Las Vegas is 2-5.
Yeah, and then Kyron Williams. Yeah, I mean, that was, I think, the main reason the Rams won. He kind of just took over this game. Of course, he got, let me get the stats. He got 21 carries, 76 yards, 2 touchdowns. And you mentioned a mediocre game from Matthew Stafford. 154 yards, not necessarily terrible, but believe it or not, that is the fewest amount of passing yards he's ever had as a Los Angeles Ram in 4 years, which is, you
Wow.
know,
Did
that's
not know
really
that.
impressive, to be honest. I think Matthew Stafford, everyone could agree, a very underrated quarterback.
Yeah.
Um, one of the best in the NFL. Not a great win for the Rams, but definitely a team that's been a little rattled by injuries and can definitely make a bit of a comeback later in the season. We'll see how things go there. Now, Panthers versus Commanders. Absolute blowout. Commanders 40-7. As a Commanders fan, really love to see that win. However, I think the Commanders fans kind of stopped focusing when we were up like 17-0, and the full attention became obviously on Jaden Daniels, who
Right.
suffered that rib injury. It was on the Commanders' first offensive play of the game, got
Mhm.
tackled in a weird way, kind of curled up by the defenders, went into the blue medical tent, eventually headed back into the locker room before being ruled out with a rib injury. However, he did come back onto the field and he had a smile on his face. He was waving hi to the fans, looked to be all right. Dan Quinn in his interview that just took place actually like an hour ago before recording this said that Daniels is going to be week to week. I'll get into that a little bit later what that means for the Commanders, but what did you see from this game?
Yeah, this was pure domination, and especially it's considering this was a backup quarterback for Washington makes it even more impressive. Marcus Mariota in his first game as a Washington Commander, 205 yards and 2 touchdowns is pretty good. Brian Robinson also got it done in the ground game, 71 yards and a rushing touchdown. And Scary Terry, almost 100 yards on 6 receptions. He had a big game. Except you said it. You put the what's the saying? You put the hammer on the nail, something like that. The main concern for the Commanders is Jaden Daniels, though when he came back out, that was a very promising sign. Wasn't in there for too long, and he was out there in street clothes on the second half. And to me, it took a while for the Panthers to get to Bryce Young. I know they wanted to stick with Andy Dalton, but at one point it was like a, 20-point game. And I thought, oh, for sure, Bryce Young's coming in here. They waited a while till the end of the fourth quarter, which was a bit surprising to me. Panthers overall played a terrible game, and defense can't give up 40 points. Simple as that. This Commanders team is probably not going to be good for a very long time. 1-6, and hey, Washington Commanders leading the NFC East at 5-2. Matt, I know you're going to be very happy about that.
Yeah, now, I mean, before I talk a little bit more about the Daniels injury, just in terms of the game itself, I feel like a Brian Robinson Jr. touchdown is almost guaranteed every week. That's what it feels like. Really love seeing him out there. And Marcus Mariota started with a few incompletions this game. And, Commanders fans were already ready to just be done with him, take him out of the game. However, he did end up playing really good after that. Almost didn't throw, after his first few passes, almost didn't throw an incompletion for the rest of the game. As you mentioned, 205 yards, 2 touchdowns, played really good. Now, in terms of whether Daniels should come back next week, of course, it's against the Chicago Bears. I think many people would like to see Daniels face off against Caleb Williams. That would be a
Mm,
matchup that a lot of people would, like to see. However, it's not worth it on the Commanders' end unless Daniels is 1,000,000% healthy and ready to play. Because this is a 5-3 team, or a 5-2 team is what I meant to say. And based on how Marcus Mariota played, I think this team can contend with the 4-2 Bears, even if Mariota is the starting quarterback. It's not worth having Daniels go into this game, get injured again, and then be out for the rest of the season, maybe, when, just let him sit one more week, make sure he's fully healthy. Worst comes to worst, we lose. We're 5-3, not the end of the world. Daniels comes back. We play the Giants in week 9. That should be another win.
right. It's too early in the season.
Yeah, absolutely. So we'll see. We will wait for more updates as we get a little closer to the next week, but definitely should not rush him back. Now we have 2 more games left to go. One of them, Chiefs versus 49ers in San Francisco. Chiefs won 28-18. Of course, if the 49ers won this one, then there would be no undefeated teams left in the NFL. However, they weren't able to do that. Juju Smith-Schuster suffered a hamstring injury. He will also be out in Week 8 against the Las Vegas Raiders. And then a big part of why 49ers offense may have struggled this game, Brandon Ayuk got injured. He had a knee injury, and it looked really bad. The 49ers fear it might be an ACL tear, which would probably put him out for the rest of the season.
Yeah.
And then you also have Deebo Samuel, who had an illness and was wearing street clothes in the second half. What did you take away from this, Super Bowl rematch from last season?
Yeah, Super Bowl rematch. And if you were to tell me that right now the 49ers would be sitting under 500 at 3-4, I'd think you're crazy. But Brock Purdy, 3 interceptions isn't going to help the cause at all. 212 yards. The main thing that I take away when you talk about just overall play from this game is that Patrick Mahomes went 16 of 27, 154 yards, no touchdowns, 2 interceptions. He's been pretty mediocre this season. I mean, he has not been the usual Patrick Mahomes that we are used to seeing in years prior. But what this shows me, Patrick Mahomes isn't playing at a very high level. This shows me what kind of team the Chiefs have built around him. Kareem Hunt, a big addition, especially while Isaiah Pacheco is out on the injured reserve, which is going to be a few more weeks after this. Noah Gray, their leading receiver, 66 yards. Travis Kelce only got 17. This is when the Chiefs, guys that you would think are non-factors, are going to step it up. This is why the Chiefs have a chance to three-peat this year. It's because they have depth. They have guys that can make plays. They have guys that can fill in well. Their defense is great. 3 interceptions. Justin Reid had 6 tackles and the pick for Kansas City. Everything pretty much went right. You had that big 55-yard punt return by McCole Harmon to set them up in beautiful field position. And then Patrick Mahomes on that magical run, sort of, to speak, where he had a ton of pump fakes. But other than that, what I saw from this game is what the Chiefs have put around Mahomes is a key to success. They're the only undefeated team in the league at 6-0.
Yeah, and Mahomes has actually never started his season off 6-0. It's the first time he's done that in his career. It really felt like George Kittle was being relied on. Of course, Christian McCaffrey also out this game. 6
Right.
receptions, 92 yards for Kittle. Overall, it wasn't enough to beat the Chiefs. Feels like the Chiefs, their winning's just inevitable. It doesn't really matter what the roster is. Never doubt them. Now, moving over to our last game of the week, a really rough game for your New York Jets. They took a 15-37 loss against the Pittsburgh Steelers in Pittsburgh. Honestly, I'll just let you take it away here. What did you see from that game?
Matthew, this Jets team is so good on paper, and yet I'm sitting here at 2-5 thinking the season is over. It doesn't make sense. Aaron Rodgers on a drive where the Jets have a chance to take the lead hits Garrett Wilson perfectly in the numbers. You couldn't ask for a better, more well-thrown ball down the sideline. And of course, in the most Jets fashion possible, pops up right to the defender who takes it. Not pick six, excuse me, got tackled at the 1-yard line. So the next play, they actually put it in. Breece Hall out of the backfield as a receiving back is a lot of what I learned from this game. 103 yards, I think 60 or 55 of them came on that one play where it was just a check down and he did the rest, lumbered his way all the way inside the 5-yard line. The addition of Devontae Adams, he was targeted 6 times, caught the ball 3 times for 30 yards. It's still a work in progress. He's still trying to get in there, understand the playbook. While he does add wide receiver depth to this team, he can't help the defense. This defense let up 37 points, although it was really 30. The Pittsburgh got a last-second touchdown to make it 37 in a 37-15 final. But this Jets defense is so banged up. Their leading tackler on the game was Jalen Mills, and if you don't know who that is, that's probably for good reason. You had DJ Reed out to start this game. You had a couple other injuries in there, and a pretty terrible injury that happened also in this game. Tony Adams went out, and a lot of guys, Isaiah Davis had to come in. This Jets defense is super banged up. They're really having trouble stopping the run. That's what this Pittsburgh offense does to you. They grind you out with Najee Harris in the ground game. They get those dink and dunk passes, but Najee Harris, 102 yards and a touchdown. George Pickens, a couple huge catches. He totaled 111 yards. Russell Wilson looked good. this is going to be a tough decision for this Pittsburgh offense on do they roll with Wilson, do they roll with Fields. Before the game, Pittsburgh said the reason that they wanted to start Wilson was to see which quarterback gave them a better chance of winning. After that game, I think it might be Russell Wilson. He looked really good, but Justin Fields is obviously a much better back. He can make more plays for you, but Russell Wilson has that history. So, Matt, it'll be very interesting to see who they go with moving on.
Yeah, I mean, I honestly absolutely think it's Russell Wilson. 264 yards and 2 touchdowns, as well as a rushing touchdown in this one. Really, really good stats for him. And then, I mean, as you mentioned, Najee Harris really dominated in that run game. George Pickens really active in the receiving game. Now, before we wrap things up, of course, you mentioned it's not necessarily time to worry about Devontae Adams' slow start. Obviously, it's just his first game as a Jet. But can this team still make the playoffs?
Yeah, 100% they can, but it's going to take a lot. When I look back on this team, I think they should be 6-1, and I think the only game that they should have lost is against the 49ers. You lose a game to the Denver Broncos where the offense scores 9 points and it's a 10-9 finish. Completely embarrassing. No chance that should happen against a pretty bad Denver team that was starting a rookie quarterback. I look back on the Bills game. You missed 2 field goals that would have won you the game, and you had an interception on that final drive there on a miscommunication on a route. Mike Williams slipped. Same thing against the Vikings. The Jets played terrible in the first half, actually ended up coming back in that third quarter with some good play. And then another miscommunication. Mike Williams is running a route. He doesn't turn around in time. Ball gets picked by Stephon Gilmore. And then in this game, the Jets came into Pittsburgh with a whole lot of pressure on them, and they just flopped. I mean, they started off really well going into the halftime with that lead, and then Pittsburgh scored 24 unanswered to finish off that game. Jets played horribly offensively in that second half, horribly all around in that second half. They didn't score any points at all offensively. The defense, terrible. It was 15-13 Jet lead at the half, and they were getting the ball coming out of halftime. Steelers then score a field goal and 3 touchdowns. That's the problem with this Jets team. They need to be able to finish games down the stretch. If they can do that, they can go to the playoffs. But this is going to be a tough hole to dig themselves out of.
Yeah, I mean, not necessarily looking great for them right now, of course, in a powerhouse AFC conference. A lot
Right.
of things that they have to figure out as the season progresses. But with that being said, I can't thank you enough for coming on. I really do appreciate it. Is there anything else you want to say to the people watching before we wrap things up?
No, thanks, everyone. Can't wait to keep doing this with you, Matt. Thanks for inviting me on.
Yeah, absolutely. And especially for that Jets game, make sure to check out Josh's podcast, Josh's Sports Report. I'm sure you have a podcast coming out soon
Yep.
recapping that Steelers game. Obviously, Yankees go into the World Series, all that good stuff. But for everyone who made it up to this point, can't thank you enough for watching. Again, I'm Matthew Heiserman alongside Josh Wolver for your Week 7 Highlight Haven NFL recap show. And as always, we'll see you next time.